Jeff Lloyd of the Orange and Brown Report covering all things Cleveland Browns. Thanks for joining me today.
You're more than welcome, Katie. Busy time of the year, certainly. And, the more opportunity you get to talk about this stuff, because look, once middle of May rolls around and the post-draft talk is tough, it's kind of over. Then we get in our little siesta, before we wait for summer to end abruptly.
Abruptly, that's right. Well, let's start with the draft. So, the big question here with pick number 2, do the Browns go with Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, or maybe Shedeur Sanders?
I was never really high on the Shedeur Sanders camp, and it's really tough for me because I've been a diehard Florida State fan my entire life. One of my
Mhm.
favorite athletes that has ever existed has been Deion Sanders. But you watch the season unfold, and then you kind of watch the film differently after the season ends. You kind of like ride the high. You know who the players are. And then, you go back and, there's times where you're rewinding something 5 and 6 times, just kind of keying in on something. And, I think Shedeur throws a perfectly good ball.
Mhm.
I think he's going to be a starter in the NFL. 94 sacks in 2 years. There's sometimes where you just come to things that are just so alarming. And,
Mm.
I'm not going to lie. Yes, his offensive line kind of stunk like a dumpster in the summertime. That's definitely the case. But a lot of those sacks were maybe sacks that could have been a 7 or 8 yard loss. And
Mm.
you see Shedeur trying to extend the play, and you give him credit, for trying to basically, go down fighting. But the thing is, he just doesn't have the athleticism that's really become something. I think people underestimate it with quarterbacks in the NFL these days. It's really something that teams are looking for. I mean, you look at the top quarterbacks, just from the NFC last year: Hurts, Jaden Daniels, of course,
Mm.
Mahomes, of course, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen in the AFC. It's really become something that, is really beneficial to quarterback play. And it's not even so much that, getting out of sacks, but then it's what you can create after you get out. It's not just getting out to
Right.
save the play, throw the ball away. So for Sanders, it was really kind of a drop, once he got deeper into it. And I kind of feel bad for him. It's kind of similar to Bronny James, I think, a little bit. You're such a lightning rod guy because of the family you come from. You
Mhm.
wonder sometimes if you're being fairly evaluated. And we're going to go through this again in the next couple of years when Arch Manning goes through this route. But for me, you look at, and I felt there were basically three players that were worthy of this top. One of them, unfortunately, Cam Ward, is going to go to the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah.
Then you get to Abdul Carter, 6'3", 250 pounds. He won't be. He'll play 21. The only game as a rookie he would play at 22 would be the Super Bowl. So he's a
Mm.
baby. So 6'6" wingspan. You see the tape, and like guys that have kind of given me that vibe with Abdul Carter. Like he gets around that quarter and it's destruction. You think of some Lawrence Taylor, you think some Sean Merriman. Like bad things happen to quarterbacks, guys in the backfield when Carter gets back there. The athleticism he never got to test, but Penn State has always been one that's really openly honest about their testing. I mean, they were one of the first schools that ever just gave out pro day numbers. They literally would just, on their social media page, they would say, here's the players, here's every event they did, and here was basically what they were timed to be. So when
Mhm.
you tell me Abdul Carter ran a 4.48 this spring before his junior year, I take that and I believe it.
Yeah.
um I mean, I think, is there some people trying to say he's undersized? He's coming into the league bigger than Von Miller. He is only 21 years old. Obviously, you talking about a guy who's probably going to go in a year two closer to 260 than that 250 he is now. So all
Mhm.
of a sudden, that undersized talk kind of goes away. Hunter, it's never going to be appreciated what Travis Hunter did this year. We've seen guys kind of dabble in it in the past,
Yeah.
whether it was, Charles Woodson, whether it was Champ Bailey back in the day, but nobody ever did it and did it full time.
Right.
And so what Hunter truly did this year, again, it probably just won't ever be appreciated. But the thing with Hunter was, and I said this very early on, is we're not going to do this two-way thing anymore. You know,
Mm.
if he's gonna go top 10, top five, wherever, you can't really say, oh well, he's going to play here and he's going to play here, because the biggest thing for me is, well, if he gets hurt, I just lost two guys. But now you look at the statistical output on the offensive side of the ball. Over 90 receptions, almost 1,200 yards, 14 touchdowns. He's great short area quickness. We don't have time speed on him either, which certainly, definitely, for me, I like having the numbers. It is a big part of how I evaluate. It
Mm.
either eases concerns or it validates maybe some concerns that I maybe did have. Okay, he is that fast. Okay, he's not that fast. But For Hunter, it's a really special ability. I think the fact that he was such a good corner is one of the reasons he's such a good wide receiver, because he's looking at the corner and he's kind of already, well, if this was me, he's kind of already playing out both scenarios.
He
So
understands them both.
exactly, and he's able to use that to his advantage. So
Mhm.
that's really certainly worked out for him as a successful standpoint. I've been on Carter as the number 2 selection, since the college football playoffs. The
Okay.
Notre Dame game sealed it for me, knowing he was injured out there, and
Mm.
basically walking away from it, going, "Well, this was the most impressive player on the defensive side of the ball in the college football playoffs semifinals, and no one basically did it with one arm."
Mhm.
Now, for Hunter, it could change a little bit now. Like my thing was building the offense front to back. You already have Judy under contract. You already had
Yeah.
Njoku under contract. Then you were going to draft Hunter. And technically, even though Flacco's here, you still don't know who the quarterback is. So it's really hard. And I use the Bengals as an example. Drafted Joe Burrow. 1 round later, they drafted T. Higgins.
Mhm.
1 year later, they drafted Jamar
Mark
Chase. So,
Chase.
like, they had the guy, kind of identified what they thought would work with the guy, and
Mhm.
then set it up that way. Flacco, look, Joe Flacco can throw you into some games, he can throw you out of some games. But you have 2 guys on the roster now who have played in the NFL, started in the NFL, have good amount of
Mm.
experience. So, and they are enamored. I know they truly like Abdul Carter, and they really, really like Travis Hunter. And they have said flat out they view him as a wide receiver. The thought
Okay.
process is, how much more does he jump? Once
Mm.
now there's no more concern at defense. He is only going to offensive meetings. You expect there's going to be, maybe even a rise from the player he is now, where, he can maybe work on whatever, I'm sure he doesn't have many deficiencies, but I'm sure there's something, that he would like to fine tune, things he would like to continue to work on. In press coverage, he fights, he's battles, but he's got to get
Mhm.
better at that because he's just not an overall strong guy. He doesn't really have the big muscular build. I know because he kind of has a build similar to me with chicken legs. Um, so you think he can improve there. I mean, for me, I don't like the people who take a stance and then all of a sudden basically just jump off. Like I've been with that Carter train since January, and for me, I think if the Browns take Carter, their defense can jump back into top 10 contention. The Browns'
Okay.
offense last year was in 32. So I don't know Hunter without knowing running back situation, tight end situation, which needs help, quarterback situation. Uh, they're going to try to run back the offensive line and basically pray for health this year.
Mhm.
And we'll see how that goes. But is all of that going to make that much of a significant jump for the Browns offense? And knowing that you need all these other guys, and most likely they're going to retool the entire offensive line in 2026. So that means I don't get to give the defense much here of the premium draft capital over the next 2 years. But if I give them Carter, that's enough for them to go eat. That's enough for them to go do what they got to do. And then I can just strictly focus on offense. But if Hunter is their guy, I
Mhm.
can see a reason, and I can certainly see the way they're going to go about this and say, hey, we've got wide receivers who are playmakers. We got David Njoku, who is a freak at the tight end position. They are analytics, so it doesn't necessarily matter, brand name running back. I think in this draft, they would probably rather draft 2 guys on day 3 as
Mm.
opposed to draft one higher. The return of the investment would be better, which is kind of what the analytic approach is. So for me, that's kind of where it's at. I'm not saying Sanders isn't somebody they wouldn't have interest in if he falls to an appropriate area, but I think they've kind of moved off of Shedeur and kind of settled in more of that Jackson Dart, Jalen Milrow territory.
Thanks for watching this episode on the BetCanada channel. I've got more Browns content coming with Jeff, so hit that subscribe button.